Welcome back to Business Owners Speak. Today, I'm really happy to have with us Mark Sunshine. Mark, how are you today?
I am well. How about yourself, Matt?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to let you tell us a little bit, not just about you, but your multiple businesses you have going on. If you don't mind, kind of walk us through.
Yeah, sure, of course. Well, I'm going to start with my background, which isn't going to make a whole lot of sense connecting to the multiple businesses. I'm a lawyer and a banker by training, and I have run as president and CEO both broker dealers as well as large financial institutions, non-bank lending companies on an international stage. And we're today going to talk about a business that I started and invested in, which is in the death services industry, meaning the funeral industry. And the companies we're going to talk about today are Cronish Funeral Services, Sunshine Cremation Services, Sunshine Autopsy Services, Sunshine Donation Services, Sunshine Senior Health, and there's one other, and I forget which it is, but they're all related businesses.
Interesting. Okay, so I guess I'll go to what led you to the transition from your previous career into this?
Well, not a really great reason. I was supposed to be CEO of a bank in Philadelphia when I got really, really sick and was in a wheelchair for 2 or 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And a friend of mine, and I was an ex-investment banker and, raised money and helped consult to businesses for years. And a friend of mine who was the former CEO of a large funeral company that had a change of control transaction, after his non-compete was up, wanted to go back into the business and asked me if I would help raise money for the business, for him to restart. And I looked at it and thought, wow, this could be pretty cool. There's all sorts of things that we can do for baby boomers that will help them as they navigate the last few decades of their lives. And a funeral home, for better or worse, is just kind of a magnet for baby boomers to walk in the door, and then for us to find other things that we could cross-sell to them that we could make money on and are really helpful to the baby boomers. So I decided to start to do that.
So which business came first?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
So did you start all the services at once?
Oh, no. We started Cronish Funeral Services, which was a fully licensed funeral home down here in Southeast Florida, where, of course, there is a large number of baby boomers. We sort of live, as people like to joke, in God's waiting room. And Sunshine Cremation Services. And then as we established those brand names, we saw other things that we could do that would help families and baby boomers that were just naturally coming to us.
Okay, so you took a look at your typical client and you had a couple products and services and thought, well, there's more things that are aligned with what we're offering. So how'd you choose which to start up next in terms of services?
Based upon demand. Yeah. We saw what people were asking for, and which we or other either funeral services companies or companies and entities that specialized in helping baby boomers weren't doing well and weren't satisfying the needs of those baby boomers that were walking in the door.
So instead of referring out that business based on all the questions, you thought, well, we'll just figure out how to offer it ourselves.
That's exactly right. So, for example, Sunshine Senior Health, right, is really a combination of legal services, long-term healthcare assistance to pay for long-term healthcare. Yeah. And when you think about it, when somebody walks into our funeral home, typically they have probate needs because somebody passed away, and probating an estate is settling an estate. They have, sometimes there was a wrongful death, right? And they have autopsy needs to establish the wrongful death or medical malpractice or something like that, hence Sunshine Autopsy. Sometimes They have the need to pay for long-term health care, which is the biggest financial risk for all baby boomers. And sometimes they just need estate planning and trust and will kind of work. So as an example, I'm a lawyer. I don't do that kind of work myself, but I know enough to be able to appropriately diagnose what people need and send them in the direction of a more competent attorney than myself to provide those services.
Interesting. Okay, so down in South Florida, there's a lot of companies that do kind of care management, right? So helping baby boomers or the elderly in multiple areas of their lives, not just referring out home care, but also doctor's appointments and all those things. Do you see yourself almost like a concierge type business where they come to you, but you can offer them multiple things? And in that elder attorney world, are you referring that out, or do you have services in-house? Okay.
Yeah, refer it out. We refer that work out.
Okay.
I'm neither a social worker nor am I a competent probate or trust and estates attorney. I wouldn't trust myself to do that work, but I know enough to know who's good,
right,
and to make sure that my clients receive top drawer services. So yeah, to a certain extent, it's the concierge service, and to a certain extent, both within the traditional funeral business as well as the or funeral home business and cremation business, as well as just generally, what we try and do is figure out how we can help people, and then we try and treat them as if we want the way we would want to be treated if the shoe was on the other foot. And those are kind of our two guiding principles: to be in the service business and make sure that we treat everybody the way we'd want to be treated ourselves if the shoe was on the other foot. And interestingly enough, it's worked out really, really, really well. Almost since the first moment that we opened, we started drawing, Google and online reviews. And for the last 5+ years, we've by far had the most Google 5-star reviews and have been #1 Yelp rated in the area. And there's nobody that even comes close to us. And it really has to do with, we're not here just to bury somebody, to put it bluntly, put them in the ground, or cremate them, to put it bluntly, burn them. We're here to guide the families, help them, and bring them through the path of this chapter in their life, from the beginning of that path to the end of the path. Again, the way we'd want to be treated ourselves in a more holistic point of view. And as a result, we are doing very well in the marketplace.
That's great. Good for you. And it's interesting, that empathy that it takes to provide those services, but also, kind of guide people and families through those multiple areas, comes from a very human place, right? And so good for you for being able to embody that, because that's what people are looking for, as opposed to more of a transactional experience where they're just figuring they're in there and they move on. But I'm curious what
I find, I'm going to interrupt you for one second.
Please.
I find that comment to be really fascinating, because when I was on Wall Street and I was a partner in a big securities firm and, ran other securities firms and ran lending companies and financial institutions and things, my nickname was Pitbull. It was a transactional business,
Right.
and I was, fairly aggressive personality, and the last person in the world that you would have thought of being an empathetic and, I was a nice guy,
right.
and I would always try and act honestly and ethically. That's always been part of me. But my usual demeanor was screaming at the top of my lungs and using obscenities to get the point across, because Wall Street traders it's not a business of subtlety. It's a business of, you got to beat the other guy over the head to get your point across, at least at the time that I was on Wall Street.
Right.
And, this experience, what you just said, is, an example of how people can change over time and keep on growing and developing. Because when I was in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, you never would have ever in a million years expressed what you just did.
Well, I was going to phrase the question differently by saying, how do you go from high-end investment banker to a business like this? But you just laid it out there for us perfectly. So I know a little bit about the senior care community, and I understand the relationship piece that it takes to make people happy and comfortable. But I'm curious, what is the main driver of the business? What service brings people to you the most? And then you can kind of branch off into the other things.
The death services business. You know, baby boomers and or their relatives sooner or later have to come to somebody like us, right? And you know, we have a very detailed, deliberate, and sophisticated digital marketing and branding strategy. That is what brings people in the door. And then when they come in the door with their permission, because we always ask, do we have your permission to change the subject, right? Some people come to a funeral home, they don't think they're there to talk about estate planning, right? So we need to move it over. Once we gain their trust, we were able to diagnose other things that we can do and other services that we can provide that will help them. But it's typically the death services business that is the main driver of people walking in the door. And that's kind of obvious. Everything else is optional. Yeah. But the death service business is, kind of mandatory.
Right. All right. Well, you've mentioned some really good success, which is great. As you look forward into the coming years, are there more services? Or are you just trying to get better at what you're doing? What's the future look like?
There are more services that we're introducing. We are trying to get better at what we do. We're constantly trying to improve what we do and be both more efficient and more caring, at least to the people that we'd like. That's meant to be a joke. Now we're caring to everybody. But I went to the University of Michigan, so I have an issue sometimes with people from Penn State, Michigan State, and Ohio State. Right. So it's and by the way, if someone comes in and I ask them typically, did you go to college? If they say yes, I say, did you go to Ohio State, Michigan State, or Penn State? And they go, well, typically no. Why do you ask that? And they said, well, we wouldn't be able to do business. That is, you laughed, and that's such a stupid statement that I just made. That breaks down the barriers because most people that come see us, they're terrified. Yeah. They're upset. They're anxious. Sometimes people need to be medicated before they walk in our doors, and I'm not exaggerating. So anything that we can do to humanize what we're doing and make us seem like caring individuals, which we are, but also real people just like them, works well to relax the other people. So we're always trying to improve. We're always trying to reduce the stress of our customers, but we're also introducing new products. For example, I'm in the process of forming an affiliated not-for-profit that is going to create something called a special needs trust here, a commingled charitable special needs trust, I should say, here in Florida. And what that does is two things, which should have broad appeal. The first is for seniors who are typically in their 70s or 80s or 90s, who are living at home, not in an institution yet, meaning not in assisted living, independent living, or a nursing home, but living at home, could be a husband and wife, and are mostly Social Security dependent for income. So we're talking about people with $30,000 to say $100,000 home incomes, annual incomes. A husband and wife, or just each individual, they have to pay Part A and Part D Medicare supplemental insurance premiums. They have to pay copays, right, on when they go to the doctor or when they go get a prescription, and they have to pay deductibles. And there's something called the donut hole in prescription drug land, which means that if you have stuff wrong with you, you could be laying out $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a year in copays, deductibles, and insurance premiums. But through a commingled special needs trust, where some of their income gets deposited into the special needs trust, and then the money is then used to pay things like rent and mortgage, insurance, and taxes, gas, food, and anything that the government doesn't already pay for. That's for the benefit of the person whose income was transferred in. So the money comes in and goes out very quickly. By using that mechanism, which is provided for under federal statutes, we can qualify those individuals for something called the Qualified Medicare Beneficiary Program. And what that means is the government picks up the tab for the insurance premiums, the copays, and the deductibles. Now, if you're a husband and wife earning or bringing home $50,000, $60,000 in Social Security and IRA 401, distributions,
Right.
and each one of you is going out of pocket $10,000 a year for medical expenses, premiums, deductibles, and copays. And by using this little trick legally, we're able to wipe out that $10,000 a year expense for the couple. That means that we just took their disposable income from $30,000 a year after paying their medical expenses to $50,000 a year after paying their medical expenses. That's pretty good.
Amazing.
That's really good. In the entire state of Florida, there are approximately 500 people that are enrolled in that program. There are millions of people in the state of Florida that are eligible to be and would want to be enrolled in that program. Millions. And in the entire state right now, because it's complicated to explain, it's complicated to understand, and you have to sort of be a lawyer to figure out how to administer it. There's 500 people, despite the tremendous benefit.
Wow.
So that's a new program that we're going to be rolling out, and we think it's going to be very highly successful.
Well, the way you explained it, there's no reason it wouldn't be. That's an amazing thing, and I think, so many times just the confusion wrapped around those kind of things makes people shy away from them. So good for you for diving head first and figuring out a way to help the seniors in Florida. That's certainly admirable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The autopsy business, another story I think that your viewers will find interesting. So I'm just a dumb lawyer. I'm sitting in the office. We're in business, right? And the phone rings. And there's this person on the other side of the phone. They say, Mr. Sunshine, this is sort of an odd question, but do you do private autopsies? Is your funeral home? So I said, gee, I have no idea. I don't know. Give me 10 minutes, I'll call you back. So I walked across the office to my partner and I said, so I just called with the weirdest question. I promised I'd call him back. Do we do private autopsies? And go, funny you should mention that. Private autopsies in Florida are performed typically in funeral homes. I said, really? It's interesting. I didn't know that. What am I supposed to do? So he goes, well, you call a friend of ours, Gary, and find out which pathologist he uses, because he does it, and call up the pathologist, get a quote from her to perform the autopsy, get it scheduled, and then mark it up by, a couple of $1,000s for what we're going to do, which is, we do a lot, right? It's a lot of work for us. And then see if you can land it. So I said, no problem, done. Land the autopsy. 15 minutes later, the phone rings again, and it's a different person on the phone that says, this is a weird question. Do you do private autopsies? To which I said, absolutely, I do. Now, my partner, Keith, he's been in business for 40 years. Prior to that, he had done 2. After that, he had done 4. In 40 years because the phone happened to ring.
You're like, right? Keith, why aren't you selling these? I'm over here knocking these out.
Right. So I'm sitting there and I think to myself, that's really odd. So I type in private autopsy Florida, right, to Google. Nothing comes up. I type in private autopsy Florida Boca Raton. Nothing comes up. I type in like 62 different versions of keywords to search for it. And you know what I discovered? Funeral directors and funeral homes don't advertise that they do private autopsies. So this took about 10 seconds for me to figure out what we're supposed to do, which is, let's make a new webpage called Sunshine Autopsy, be part of the funeral home. We'll get Google listing. We'll pay a little bit in advertising, we'll pay maybe $20 a month in advertising. And we now have a material share of the autopsy business in South Florida.
Wow.
And it was just, there was market demand. Look to see what the competition was. It's like a business school case, right?
Yeah.
Really straightforward, not a hard thing. We also do other things where we contribute to the community. Every so often, contributing to the community sounds like a philanthropic thing, and it is, but it can also lead to more business. So, for example, research institutes that are trying to cure Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, MS, Lewy body, ALS, that sort of thing, degenerative neurological diseases. They have a little problem getting a hold of live human neurological tissue to study, do drug tests on, DNA testing, do all the stuff that's needed to cure those diseases for some obvious reasons. You can't just, anywhere else in our body, if we have something goes wrong, you can go take a biopsy and get live tissue. You can't do that typically with neurological tissue. Although my wife believes that they may have done it to me at some point, but we'll put that aside for a second. I may not have all of my brain. But anyway, we'll put that aside for a second. My kids definitely agree with my wife. Anyway, so there are medical schools in regional centers, they're called brain banks, that collect neurological tissue from very recently deceased individuals. And when I say very recently deceased, I mean, you got to do it within 12 to 24 hours or less. There's stuff you got to do to the person when they pass away. So neurological tissue is preserved, et cetera, et cetera. And so along comes somebody that wants to donate their brain to a brain bank. And they asked if we did that. So I said, I don't know, let me go talk to my partner. I'll get back in 10 minutes. Go talk to Keith. He says, yeah, we can do that. It's blah, 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 et cetera.
Right.
So then it occurred to me, why don't we actually promote that? And now we're closely aligned with the University of Florida, the University of Colorado, Columbia University, and Indiana University, and we just did one for Duke University Medical School, and handle the harvesting of neurological material. Now, we'll do it at our facility. We donate our facility, we donate our trucks, we donate our refrigerator, we donate stuff to those schools, right? They hire the diener, it's the person, the technician that comes in and harvests the material and sends it off. But when a family finds out that we do this and that their loved one who has been suffering from Parkinson's can make a positive contribution so that others don't have to suffer from Parkinson's or dementia, horrible diseases, most often, the family or the person that's got the disease wants to play. They want to donate the brain to help others not suffer the same fate. And lo and behold, we'll do it if somebody's getting cremated or buried by another funeral home. But most often, they end up transferring their funeral or cremation services to us as a reward for supporting those research programs. So that would be another example of how we gather business. It's a little different than other funeral homes, yet the same.
Amazing. And, even just in the autopsy phone call, so many people's automatic reaction is, nope, sorry, we don't offer that. Maybe I can help you find somebody, but very few people just think, well, wait a minute, maybe we can just do it. So that's, you should be commended for that. So Mark, tell me real quick as we wrap up, how about some advice for other business owners, maybe just start now?
Couple of things. First, figure out what you stand for and what you want people to view you as being, right? So we want people to view us as being the nicest, most considerate, highest service provider, and a company that also provides value, right? I mean, we charge for it, but we provide value. People think that what we charge is fair, right? And you got to decide what you stand for, what your personal brand is, and then imprint that on the company. The second thing you got to do is you got to listen to your customers. Now, that doesn't mean when you have outrageous and unreasonable customers that yell at you, you just take it. That means you listen to what your customers need and want and what itch they're trying to scratch, and scratch it for them. Solve the problem. It doesn't matter if it's strictly within your mandate or what you think your mandate is. Figure out how your mandate helps solve the most important problems and challenges facing your customers. And those would be the two things. And everything is sales. You gotta constantly get your name out there so that when people figure out they have that need for one of the services, goods or services you provide, you're one of the first phone calls.
Yep. Really good stuff, Mark. Fascinating journey from start to finish for you, and we really appreciate you sharing it, kind of changing the lives and the experience of people in South Florida. So thank you very much for your time today, and we wish you all the best of luck in the future.
Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate it.
You bet.